Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition. Around the round table today, Debbie Georgatos, and she has been with us on many occasions and will be in the future, but we're going to give you a chance to join our conversation a little bit later. It's a way in which we have a chance to look at all sorts of things that have happened in the news and then also look ahead to some things that will be happening in the future. We're going to be talking about some of these religious liberty issues, certainly quite a bit today to talk about ISIS. Was done with Oliver North on that particular topic. Is there a split right now between the administration and the Pentagon? And what about our southern border and some of the dangers there? This week, of course, was also Constitution Day, and some things came down about that. We'll talk about some of those issues a little bit later. We'll talk about Obamacare and the American decline. That's one of our articles we've posted, so lots to cover. Debbie Georgatos, author of the book Ladies, Can We Talk? A talk with me.
Thank you for having me.
When we were here last week, we spent some time talking with our friend Kelly Shackelford about what happened in Arkansas State. And even though he's not here, you're a lawyer, we can talk about some of these religious liberty cases, because as many of our listeners know, Arkansas State University said, you can maybe honor these individuals that died. There was a student and an equipment manager, but putting a cross on the back of your helmet, well, that just goes too far. So they said, well, you could take off the bottom part of the cross and make it look like a plus sign, and that got even worse. So anyway, the bottom line is, because of the involvement of our good friends at Liberty Institute, Arkansas State University announced on September 17th, Constitution Day, interesting enough, when we celebrate our founding fathers, we indeed will allow the memorial crosses on the team football helmets. The university's decision came after it found itself scrambling under a legal blitz from groups like Liberty Institute, as well as the publicity they received nationwide. The crosses were affixed, of course, to simply memorialize a fellow player and an equipment manager, both whom tragically died this year. And Debbie, this is a good example of much to do about nothing. A cross on the back of a helmet was just too much for Arkansas State University to handle. But then when they began to hear from the constituents and even some of the alumni, quickly they changed their minds.
I love thinking about the fact that people speaking up made a difference. And you hear things all the time that happen that you think, well, I don't want to make a big fuss. But speaking up helps bringing public attention. And the notion that you'd even think about whether you can have a cross, a symbol that means so much to majority of Americans on the back of a football helmet is really, it's pretty amazing, pretty surprising.
Well, I thought I'd mention another one, and certainly you've been following some of these court cases, because also on Constitution Day, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, you lived in California, I'm originally from California, so sometimes they call it the Ninth Circus, but anyway, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued an order, and it declined a request to actually hear the case, and this had to do with 4 students at a California high school who were sent home because they were wearing an American flag T-shirt on Cinco de Mayo. And in a sense, what they did is just affirm that, yes, the administration, in this case the judge, and also, of course, the principal, could tell these students that on Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, that students wearing an American flag T-shirt were disruptive and that they sent them home. So it looks like the Ninth Circuit Court concluded that wearing an American flag is just too controversial.
It is a circus after all. It's such a basic First Amendment right. It's a form of speech, a form of expression to say, I love America, I want to stand for it. And, I could see if a message was harsh or angry or negative or ugly towards Cinco de Mayo, people celebrating that. But saying I love America is a First Amendment right, and I'm very disappointed here that the Ninth Circuit couldn't see it that way.
Well, again, the administrators said that the shirts were incendiary, and they worried that fighting would break out between white and Latino students if Latino students noticed that. So that was the case. Now, one of the things that came from some of the Latino students that said, well, we don't wear a Mexican flag on the 4th of July. Of course, that's not a school day, but never mind. That was one of the arguments.
And no one stops them if they care to. I mean, they can do it if they want to. They could wear a Mexican flag on the 4th of July if they wanted to.
Yeah, well, again, I just think you are finding things are getting real controversial. And while I'm talking about American flags, again, after a while, you just think we're making these up. But there's just a couple more that I dug up, and that is that in Woodruff, South Carolina, so we'll move from California, the left coast, to the east coast, and here a number of students at Woodruff High School decided to remember September 11th terrorist attack by flying American flags on their trucks in the school parking lot, and that apparently violated school policy. So indeed, the principal, Aaron Fulmer, removed the flags from the trucks and returned them at the end of the school day because they've said they've had a long-standing district policy. And so here are the students simply trying to fly a flag on September 11th. That was unconstitutional, or at least violating school policy in that particular case.
Gosh, I honestly had not heard of some of these cases. I'm glad to be here today hearing about them. And that particular one, it is true when you have a generic rule. For example, if a school said every kid wears a uniform and everyone wears black, dress pants and a white shirt or something like that, where someone's saying for whatever reason I want to wear something different, you say, well, you have to have a policy to enforce it. But underlying that case and probably the other ones we're talking about, there's just kind of a notion that really being American and loving Americanism and loving what America stands for, it isn't popular in the academic culture. And that's part of what the problem, or people sense about it, I think, is even though I understand there's a basic rule everyone has to follow, there's something that just, it resonates or suggests this idea that we don't want to have too much love of America expressed openly.
Well, and again, we recognize that wearing a flag could be controversial, flying a flag could be controversial, but having a T-shirt that says "Virginity Rocks" is also unconstitutional, or at least against school policy. I guess I should be a little more careful with my words because they weren't necessarily saying it was wrong, but they were believing that they had the constitutional authority to tell, in this case, Fayetteville, Arkansas, this particular woman, Chloe Rubiano, and I'm looking at her picture right now and of her T-shirt. She was at a Christian festival that had a T-shirt that said "Virginity Rocks," and the school officials banned the shirt because they were saying that message could lead to uncomfortable conversations about sex. So again, more and more of these young people are being told they can't wear this T-shirt or that T-shirt. And I wouldn't think just a few years ago that a flag T-shirt or a Virginity Rocks T-shirt would actually be that controversial, but apparently these are.
They are controversial. And you have to wonder, with all of the crass lyrics in rock songs and in just modern culture in movies and television, the idea, and that offends a lot of people, but we don't seem to be able to stop that. But a young woman claiming for standing up for virginity, being told that was what was offensive or troublesome or going to cause trouble, it's just turned on its head.
Yeah. One last one, and I will end there, but I have a whole stack that you can see that I'm not going to get to today. And that is one we talked about earlier in the week in Rochester, Michigan, in the Rochester Adams High School there. That's where this daughter was being escorted into the school by Lieutenant Colonel Sherwood Baker, and he was told by the security personnel that an uniform would offend the students, and it was inappropriate, so he was not allowed to escort his daughter into the school. Of course, there's a fair number of Muslim students there. This is another one that had a positive resolution, and that is later the principal did apologize for that. But again, we see that we're finding all sorts of things that are apparently offensive, whether it's a uniform, whether it's a flag, or virginity. Well, just a few updates on religious liberty and why we need to be ever vigilant. We're going to come back and talk about some other issues in the news right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Brady Boyd admits in a recent article, "I'm addicted to being busy," but he is quick to add that he isn't the only one with a problem. He's a pastor and sees lots of problems. He says, "We think if we can keep going, keep busy, keep plowing ahead, our conscience won't have time to catch us. We think it is easy to chase after the tempting buzz of busy living, so we have learned to actually recognize the signs of addiction of busyness. First, you feel like you're in your glory when you're busiest. Most of us like how success feels, so we don't want to unplug. We don't want to relax. If you are a busyness junkie, the last thing you want is any semblance of white space because that will cause the undesirable effects of withdrawal. Second, you're more fascinated with gadgets than with God. Brady Boyd tells the story of getting to work and realizing he left his phone at home. He admits that he was more distraught than if he had misplaced one of his children. He says he did get a different kind of call that day. It was a call from God. "Come to me and I will give you rest." He didn't pick up. Third, your favorite compliment has become, "Wow, you're always so busy." Unfortunately, in our world today, being busy is a way to impress people. The calculation goes like this. If I'm busy, then I'm important. If I'm important, then you'll be impressed. He says impression management becomes a full-time job and it's exhausting. Fourth, you don't have time for the ones you love. If we're observant, we can see the hurt in the eyes of our loved ones. They feel like you have time for everyone but them. They feel neglected. I applaud Brady Boyd for his honesty and vulnerability. We are busy people, and we need to reevaluate our priorities in our busy lives. Most of us are doing too much. We're hurting the people around us, and we're hurting ourselves. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, went through very quickly just a few of the religious liberty issues. And as we open up the phones in just a few minutes, if you want to comment on some of those, you certainly can. And as I pointed out, there are many more to cover, but we'll do that another day. There are always more religious liberty stories than we can possibly cover in that first segment, but did want to do that. Debbie Georgatos with us as we are talking today for a while about Islam and about the Middle East and the Middle East strategy. A little bit later, we'll talk about the fact that it was a Constitution Day earlier in the week in which some of these decisions came down. Lots of other topics to get into. But Debbie, you and I kind of traded emails today about this piece. Rift widens between President Obama and the U.S. military over strategy to fight Islamic State. And I thought before we hear what Oliver North had to say about it, I'd love to get into this because right now we're being told that, well, the administration and the Pentagon pretty much are on the same page. I don't think they are at all.
They are not at all. The administration's main slogan has been no boots on the ground, and they're responding to the fact that America seemingly is tired of war in Iraq. However, the ISIS beheadings, the violence people are seeing, make people realize that we need to do something, and there are threats to America coming out of the Islamic State people. So the one comment that started off made it obvious there is a rift was by retired Marine General James Mattis, and he told the House Intelligence Committee that a blanket prohibition on ground combat was tying the military's hand. Those were his words, tying the military's hands. Yes. Half-hearted, tentative efforts or airstrikes can backfire on us. And then we had Army General Martin Dempsey, who's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a very rare thing, actually publicly suggested that this policy of no boots on the ground set by the Commander-in-Chief should be reconsidered. And there are other prominent people. Army General Lloyd Austin, he's commander for the Middle East. he'd already commented that he wanted to put boots on the ground when Biden was overruled. And then we had Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel trying to reassure the House Armed Services Committee yesterday. We're in full alignment. The leaders, the military leaders of the Pentagon and the White House are in full alignment, in complete agreement with every component of the president's strategy, which obviously could not be a true statement.
I would think so. So again, I think one of the most powerful one is Martin Dempsey basically taking kind of a rare step of publicly suggesting that the policy set by the president, our commander-in-chief, should be reconsidered. And in just a minute, I want to hear from Oliver North, because he points out what I think all of us know, and certainly as we open up the phone, some of you in the military can speak to this even more so. You really are not allowed to question the command of the commander-in-chief publicly. That can be a career-ending kind of action. So when you get these little hints, you know that it's like an iceberg. You only maybe see 10% above the water, but 90% below the water. They're going, this is a dumb idea. This is not going to work. This is going to put it at risk. Whatever the concerns are, they're not going to be able to really explain that. So one of the reasons I wanted to go to somebody who's no longer in the military to maybe speak candidly is, of course, we'll go to Oliver North. But you had some other things that came out of that article as well.
One of the clear expert, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, spoke out. He's still considered very influential in the Pentagon. And his statement was, there will be boots on the ground if there's to be any hope of success in the strategy. He actually makes the point, which is so good in CBS News, the president, in effect, traps himself by repeating this mantra that he won't send U.S. troops in it. And not only he traps ourselves in our ability to make a winning strategy, and he signals to the enemy, don't worry, we're not coming too hard.
Well, let's see if we can get a chance to hear from Oliver North. This is a piece that actually comes from the Kelly file, so we thank Megan Kelly for putting this together, and he really helps us understand a little bit more about some of the concerns by those in the military about the strategy the president has put forward.
The president says if those troops are sent to the front lines, they will not be in a combat role. But will they really have a choice if they find themselves under fire? And if they do, God forbid, could they even pick up a weapon under this plan to defend themselves? Colonel Oliver North is host of War Stories here on Fox News and author of the book Counterfeit Lies. Ollie, good to see you. All right, so the president says no boots on the ground, no boots, no boots. Dempsey comes out and says maybe. Gates comes out and says yeah. Odierno says yeah, we're going to need them. President Obama again, well, not a combat mission. They won't be forward deployed. And by the way, the Iraqis are going to do it, and they have to do it, and they will do it. But Odierno just told us they can't do it.
They can't. And the sad fact of it is that the Iraqis have about the $12 billion worth of equipment that we've delivered in the last 3 years. 2/3 to 3/4 of it has either been captured by ISIS, is broken, or unserviceable. And on top of that, the volunteers that showed up after Mosul fell to ISIS, driven there essentially by al-Sistani, the leading cleric of the Shiite faith over in Iraq, he called for volunteers. 15,000 plus showed up. They carried their AK-47 that was rusty, a half magazine, and they showed up in their sandals. No food, no equipment, and essentially they got sent home. What you have is the only force capable of fighting right now inside the borders of what we used to call Iraq are the Kurds. And the Kurds aren't even getting support directly from the United States. They're getting it from France and Albania.
So what are we going to do? What does it mean that we are going to be with them, but not forward deployed?
Well, look, in my military mind, what you have is Operation Enduring Confusion. What you have is a president who cannot make up his mind what he wants. The coalition that John Kerry spoke so eloquently of this afternoon in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is non-existent. The idea of Arab air power aiding and abetting our mission over there, Arab air power is an oxymoron. They can't do this. We can do it, but we would have to put American forward air controllers and joint tactical air controllers on the ground at the battalion level with the Iraqi army and with the Kurds. The Kurds are not going to go fight to take Damascus. And so the end result, nor the Iraqis, they couldn't. And so the end result is you have a balloon that you're squeezing at one end, perhaps in Iraq, pinpoint accuracy with airstrikes that we're really good at, and yet no ability to go after ISIS in their safe haven that Barack Obama says they shouldn't have.
Why isn't he listening to the generals. We've got General Odierno saying you cannot do it with airstrikes alone. You need capable ground troops. And, Mr. President, that doesn't include the Iraqis right now. And you've got Bob Gates saying you need troops on the ground. Dempsey signaled we need troops on the ground, possibly. He doesn't seem to be listening.
Megan, I've spent my whole life in and around the U.S. military and been on plenty of times with you from Iraq and other places. I've spent my life with these young guys. I'm waiting for the general or admiral who will stand up on his hind feet and say, this is mission impossible. Given the constraints that you've given, we cannot accomplish the objective that you've set. It is impossible to do. They're talking now about taking 5,000 of the so-called Free Syrian Army, somehow exporting them from Syria, getting them to Saudi Arabia and training them, and sending them back in 8 to 12 months. By then, ISIS will number 45 or 50,000. 5,000 troops to fight a two-front war against Assad and against ISIS. It's not something that can be done. Somebody has to tell the truth. Some general or admiral at the Pentagon or somewhere else in Central Command has got to stand up and say, the mission we've been given we can do, but we can't with the constraints you've placed upon us. And the tragedy of it is that the disaster that befalls us is the first story you started with tonight, with more and more of them coming in from their safe haven into this country to threaten Americans right here in the homeland.
Oh, good gracious. Colonel North, good to see you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much, sir.
Gives you a little bit of an idea, and I think, again, this comes from the Kelly file, Megyn Kelly interviewing Oliver North. We're going to get him on, but he did such a good job explaining it there. First of all, Operation Enduring Confusion, and he says, I'm waiting for a general or an admiral who will stand up on his hind feet and say this is mission impossible. This does not look good, and it seems to me that if indeed some of the generals were free to explain how difficult this would be, the American people would say, wait a minute, Mr. President, we're not sure we want to commit to this right now.
Absolutely. And, I think he is being told this. President Obama is hearing this message. I'm sure he actually gets a report about what Colonel North is saying, but he's also hearing it even from Congress. That Representative Buck McKean from California, who's chair of the Armed Services Committee, suggests Obama needs to listen to his commanders. He's saying, please follow the advice and counsel he receives. He is being told, and this idea that it's like a political stunt almost to say boots on the ground, not how do we win this?
Yeah. And I want to come back from the break and talk a little bit about, because you did an interview recently with somebody who's been with the CIA, and I think what she was warning is don't let the emotions of the beheadings draw us into something that doesn't make sense strategically. And I hear Oliver North raising some very good questions and other generals raising some very good questions. So if you are maybe looking for some perspective, on our website today, the second article, ISIS Strategy is Mission Impossible. This piece with Oliver North. You can read the article, and then, of course, there's a video there which you might want to watch again. We played, of course, the audio from that. And then, of course, we have some other articles we can post about the rift that is really deeply dividing the administration from the Pentagon. And so we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll also begin to take your phone calls. We're only a third of the way through all the things we're going to talk about today, but if you'd like to join us on anything we've put on the table so far, 1-800-351-1212. Also going to bring the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly, in to give us an update on that $50,000 match. How did we do? He'll give us the final numbers, and we thank those of you that have supported this ministry. So let's take a break, and if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Debbie Georgatos, you can go to our website, the first web link there, Ladies Can We Talk. We'll give you more information about her and her talk show. We'll continue our conversation with her and you right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition. David Georgatos with us, but we've also brought into the studio for a few minutes the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly. And as many of our listeners know, we did have a match on the table, and it was an opportunity for people to have their gift matched dollar for dollar. Well, if you were listening on Monday, I was trying to have a positive look to this because we were down to the last day of the match because the individual that provided this said, okay, we'll go to September 15th. That was Monday. And I looked a few days before that and said, we're not even close. And even on September 15th, I wasn't so sure we're close. But Warren, you have some good news, so tell us exactly what took place.
We do. You and I were on the air last Monday, and we were both a little nervous at that point because we've never not made a match, but we were cutting it. We were a long way short. I mean, we were really short coming into it on that last day, and the last day is always the biggest day. But
yes. I don't know why everybody waits to the last day, because it's not good for my blood pressure. But.
But the good news is we did match. We did make the match. Our final total that has come in, we had a couple of things that came in the mail. We told people if they postmark them by Monday that we'd count them. And so we had a few that came in today, which gives us a grand total of $53,653.
That's pretty good.
Just a little bit over the mark, so that's great.
And one of those gifts still coming in, but we know it's coming, so we'll count that one because they had already promised that. But you've had some stories about people that have waited to the last moment, and I thought at least you'd share one or two.
We are very grateful for everyone that gave, but there was one gentleman that called on Tuesday morning. He lives in California, in Lancaster, California, and called to say that he had heard the show on it as a delayed release feed and heard the show at 10:30 and got out of bed at 10:30 at night to go to his computer to make a gift online. But he was concerned that knowing that it was already past midnight here in Dallas, that might not count. So he called us just to be sure. I want to make sure that counts. So we got it in.
I love it when people get out of bed to support Point of View. So that was a good story. And again, we've certainly been appreciative of what individuals are doing. And for just a minute before we get back to the program, let's talk about all the things that we are doing, because right now people can obviously watch the live feed, and so they can see what Debbie looks like, what you look like, what I look like. They can obviously download the podcast, and 30,000 podcasts downloaded every single month. We are just about ready to have our new website released, and we're in an election year. We have the POV section, the what is called Pray, Organize, and Vote, which will give them contact with all the voter guides that we're aware of so that they can make intelligent choices. And then on Tuesday, we were telling everybody that we've started the first of the video series that is in the YouTube channel on Point of View. So when people are supporting Point of View, they're not just supporting a radio ministry. There's just a full-fledged media ministry, and the reason for that is we recognize this is how we're going to reach the next generation. Right. The younger you are, the less likely you are perhaps to listen to a terrestrial radio. Even if you listen to radio, you're probably going to listen to it on your iPad or your iPhone or something like that. So we recognize how important it is to develop these various outreaches, and so that's what those funds are actually going towards.
Well, and it's exciting to look at the reports. You know, we get a lot more detail in the reports that come from the online stuff than we do with the on air through the radio. But we're seeing now that a third of the people that are downloading the podcast don't even live in the country.
Yeah.
So we're now, the internet's allowing us to reach people across the globe. So we have, hundreds of people in Japan, in China, in just everywhere
I look at this
around
and
the
I
country.
say, who in Bahrain, who in Abu Dhabi, in Singapore
is listening to
Point of View? And the bottom line is there are people, I mean, as I've jokingly said, the sun does not set on the Point of View broadcast. You can literally go around the world and find people in virtually every country in the world that either download the podcast, or a lot of them have any kind of internet connection, or are watching the podcast. So, Debbie, there are people in Japan right now watching, or probably in the morning, or we're going to be watching it later on, watching the conversations that we're having right now.
Did not know that. That's fabulous.
So again, those are the kinds of things that are happening behind the scenes. And again, we were really close to having the first time we did not make a match. But again, as always, the Point of View listeners came through. So that was great news.
And we are very, very grateful for your support and all the things that's making possible.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Debbie, we are going to get back to the issues on the air. Let me take one of our phone calls real quickly, too. By the way, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go first to the state of Georgia, listening on the Good News Network. And Frank, what would you like to share with our listeners today?
Yes, I really enjoy your program. Everybody, talks about how President Obama does this and that. I really believe that he wants us to fail. He's doing everything possible to make himself look good, but yet nobody just come right out and saying he don't want us to win. I honestly believe that all this training troops in them 6 months, he wants them to overtake us. That's my honest opinion.
Well, whether he's doing it intentionally or not, I remember the famous line in Rambo 2. Can we win this time? And that's kind of the feeling that people have had about Vietnam. It really was some of the question that people even had about Desert Storm, but this is one where Oliver North is actually saying it's Operation Enduring Confusion, and he's really saying, I'm waiting for a general or an admiral who will stand up on his hind feet and say that this is mission impossible. So we're hearing people in slight ways if they're still in the military, and others in very big ways when they're outside of the military saying, Mr. President, this is a guarantee for failure. Whether he intends it or not, that's what's going to happen with the strategy we have right now, right?
Absolutely. It's terrible to try to guess what someone else is really thinking, but certainly by his conduct, President Obama is not speaking in the terms and speaking with a passion and taking the action you would take if you saw the Islamic State, ISIS, as the true evil that it appears to be. And they are speaking about wanting to come to America. They spoke of flying a black flag over the White House. And so there's, you want to hear more of a determination, and this kind of drawing a line saying no troops on the ground without waiting to see what happens next, what they do, what we think strategically is the best. It signals at the very best, it signals extreme weakness and perhaps even just not really up for the fight.
1-800-351-1212. Love to get your thoughts about whether we should deploy troops and whether or not you have confidence in the strategy that the president has put forward. And just before we take a break, Debbie, let me come back to an interview that you did on your radio program. I would encourage other stations out there to listen to your program, maybe on a Sunday morning, or find out more about it. But you interviewed somebody who had worked with the CIA, and her caution was, as horrific as these videos of the beheadings are and things of that nature, we have to make sure that what we do is in the strategic best interest of America. What else did she share with you?
Exactly. This woman is Claire Lopez, and she's a senior advisor for the Center for Security Policy in Washington, long-term CIA person. And yes, her number one caution was not to have anyone in America agitating for action that just based on the emotion of watching the beheadings. So she talked about, there's been millennia of battles between Sunni and Shiites. Not millennia, hundreds of years of battles between Sunnis and Shiites. We don't need to get in the middle of a battle over there, but we do need to think our strategy is what protects American interests. And she did talk about on the homeland in America, the border being vital to truly secure, recognizing all the ways that people come to America. And then she also talked about internally what happens in America, that we do have the term is being used as civilization jihad. We do have Muslims in America who mean America harm. And we need to be protecting our institutions, protecting ourselves, our country, our government from the influence or push toward Sharia, toward anything that would establish a Muslim power base here in America. And as to the military action, I don't think she would. Certainly, I didn't ask her the direct question, what do you think about this no boots on the ground line? But she certainly talked about the need for strategic troops, strategic use of our military forces, listening to the commanders. She's saying kind of like what Oliver North was saying. You've got to listen to the people who know what they're talking about.
I might just mention that her boss, Frank Gaffney, will be sitting in that chair on Monday when we do that interview with him, and I'm sure he will have something to say about the strategy. This was a man that was Undersecretary of the Defense Department under Ronald Reagan, so certainly he will have some comments about that. And let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some more phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. But I want to get to a piece that you passed on to me as well from Francis Martel. Obama administration denies the threat of ISIS crossing the southern border. There is a sense in which some people think, well, that's a problem over in the Middle East. It has no impact for us. You've already sort of elucidated that. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about that because, again, you're getting a difference of opinion. You have some that are simply saying there's no problem, a lot in the administration, maybe even some in the mainstream media. You have others at the border saying, you are kidding yourself. I mean, you have no idea what we're finding in backpacks, the kind of people we're running into, and the concern that we have that ISIS isn't just over there, it's here as well. So we'll talk about that with Debbie Georgatos. And if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, you can join us, 1-800-351-1212. A little bit later in the second hour, we're going to get into some of these other issues. For example, that was Constitution Day this week, and maybe we can learn a little bit more about the United States Constitution. We've posted a couple of things about the Affordable Care Act, and of course this week we learned that whether you believe it or not, we're paying for abortion through our subsidies in Obamacare. Lots to cover, but we'll take your phone calls right after these important messages.
There's much talk today, even in Christian circles, about getting our needs met. A counselor I know asked this question: are we a bucket of needs waiting to be filled in order to give to others what God commands we give? Many people would never get around to following God's plan if they were waiting to first get their own felt needs met. In fact, many of what we call needs, much of what we think we really deserve and have got to have, well, these are not really needs. We desire things like love and significance, which, although blessings, are not needs. Often we'll find these blessings in relationships, like marriages or friendships. Trouble is, Christians who don't get all these blessings are told they are needs and to look to Jesus as the need meter. This rings true, but is it? My psychologist friend Steve Clay wants believers to look at this differently, and first to consider what our real needs are. Certainly we need food and water to live on this earth. We need God's forgiveness through Christ to live eternally. But what about our psychological and emotional desires? Are they needs? We were created to need other people, but not, and stick with me here, not necessarily to be loved by them. Steve writes, we need other people in order to accomplish God's purposes and most accurately reflect His ultimate glory. This means that we need to love rather than we must be filled by another's love. And conversely, he writes, to love another is not because they need love, but rather there is a need in us to reflect the character of God in showing love. Marriage is a teacher here. A lot of us enter marriage expecting it to meet our needs, and we learn pretty quickly about the ebb and flow that sometimes means you have to give more than you get. Some people lament that they're mostly on the net giving side. Psychologist Ed Welsh says this imbalance is actually scriptural. Philippians 2:3 instructs believers to, with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. This doesn't mean, writes Dr. Welsh, that we don't care about being loved. It simply means that we always want to outdo others in love. He then asks, do we run the risk of a lopsided relationship? Absolutely. This is the relationship we have with God. He always loves first and most. This way of looking at needs helps with another problem many Christians readily admit to having. We'll confess to being people pleasers, seeing this as perhaps a lesser sin, but it's really idolatry. Dr. Welsh asks believers, where is our treasure? Our treasure is in the admiration of others. Pleasers seek the approval of other people more than God, and that is in the wrong order. Believing saint, you need to seek Him. Then you'll reflect His glory. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us, and let's go to the phones again, listening on KYCC in California. Anthony, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I just have a question on the accountability factor for what's going on right now in the presidency. Where is the accountability when the president has done so many wrong things and Congress and the Senate has allowed them to? Who holds who accountable?
That's right. We're supposed to have checks and balances, aren't we? I mean, again, let's let the process play out. And right now you have Trey Gowdy looking at Benghazi, and you've had certainly Darrell Issa, excuse me, I said it was wrong. Darrell Issa that is looking at the Internal Revenue Service issues, and there's been a lot of stonewalling and the rest. But yes, there seems to be a lack of checks and balances within the government. And then another relevant question, Anthony, is where's the mainstream media? I mean, the ones that gloated about bringing down Richard Nixon or exposing some of the scandals that existed in previous presidencies. So I think there's some very good questions that need to be asked, and those are the questions I think you need to ask of your elected officials and say, where are we on this? Are you going to do anything, or are we just going to have a lot of words?
Yeah, they do need to hear elected officials, Congress and Senate, at the federal level need to hear from their constituents. And one problem is so much of what President Obama does that is clearly not permissible is via executive order. And so it's been a very hard, it's a struggle to find who has standing, who will the courts allow to bring a case to challenge those? And I was looking on my phone a little bit, quick research about executive orders. There's really some precedent for the Supreme Court striking down an executive order, but I know in many cases that even Congress has been told they don't have standing to argue about the context. But one time they did, the Supreme Court struck down a President Bush's executive order because they found that it directly contradicted a federal law, that his order, this had to do, it was too much detail, but it directly conflicted with a federal law, and said in that case, which was the Detainee Treatment Act 2005, then it went ahead and struck down that order. But the problem really is he does things, and there's not a lot of clear law, even the Supreme Court level, about executive orders and what's permissible. And it's just always a gambit or challenge for Congress to decide, how is this worth it? Is this bad enough to challenge and end up in a case we might lose and plus endure all the mainstream media's criticism of us? Is it worth it or not? And I think that a lot of times they decide not.
Well, the question that I ask to a lot of my liberal friends is, then since you don't seem to have any problem with what this president is doing, then I assume that you would have no problem later on what a Republican president would do, whether it's a President Marco Rubio, President Rand Paul, President Ted Cruz, President Rick Perry, whatever that person might be. And so you wouldn't have any problem at all with them issuing an executive order and postponing all of Obamacare, because after all, you allow the President Obama to postpone elements of Obamacare, and they would simply take it off the table. You'd have no problem at all of him beginning to no longer spend funds with the, for example, the EPA or other particular groups, because he was able to enact various kinds of legislative actions through executive order. And they go, oh, no, I wouldn't let him do that. Well, see, that's the point, because what is sauce for the liberal goose can become sauce for the conservative gander.
Absolutely. Everyone should care about the lines the Constitution has set being blurred and literally eviscerated in this administration.
I think so. We did promise that we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the southern border for just a minute. Next hour, we'll certainly take some more phone calls on the issue of ISIS if you would like to join us. But one of those questions that still is on the table, this comes from a piece by Francis Martel in talking about the fact that the Department of Homeland Security denied that there was credible evidence to believe Islamic State terrorists could use our southern border to cross in the United States. Debbie, I've seen some of your Facebook posts and some of your Twitter posts to know that you know as well as I do, people on the border, both Border Patrol and people just picking up backpacks that have been left behind, already know that individuals are crossing into our southern border that probably intend us harm.
Absolutely. You know, there was a video that went viral recently where that James O'Keefe, I think his name is, who makes videos, he dressed up like he dressed up like Osama bin Laden. He looked just like him and had himself videoed. He was in Mexico. He came across a river. He walked a few miles. He was into America, walked a few miles to a highway, started hitchhiking. No one stopped him. So quite literally, Osama bin Laden can cross our southern border. Therefore, anybody else can. But yes, there have been cases of prayer rugs. Just this year, there were American security contractors that found prayer rugs along the Arizona border with Mexico. And there have been, numerous instances. In fact, there was a a 2010 report about a large pile of Iranian currency and prayer rugs being regularly found at the border. And even the former DHS, Janet Napolitano, the DHS secretary, testified in 2012 at a hearing, confirmed terrorists have crossed the southwest border with the intent to harm the American people. There's no speculation to be had because it is porous, because it is not a secure border. Anyone could come.
You know, they pull out these backpacks, and in one of the backpacks, I know that they found blueprints for a nuclear facility. Now, you could assume that that individual just simply wanted to maybe work at that nuclear facility.
He was researching.
I don't think so. You see some that have very detailed plans. You have other things written in Arabic. You have some where they're contact points, and those contact points are known individuals that have been on a watch list. You really have to just almost have your head deeply buried into the sand to come to this conclusion that there is no threat to our southern border from, say, a group like ISIS.
Absolutely. And actually, the article that you've been mentioning is titled, if it's on the site, Obama Administration Denies Threat of ISIS Crossing Southern Border. It actually includes references to the concern about ISIS and other jihadists crossing America from our northern border, and how there's a growing concern about jihadists in Canada. And as you know, we're much less protective of our northern border with Canada. So that's another, in fact, it goes into great detail talking about the number of jihadist groups forming in Canada and their interest in coming to America.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take some of your phone calls, because that certainly generated some controversy and some questions. And if you'd like to speak to that issue, not only are we talking about some of the questions of the strategy to deal with ISIS or ISIL, but also the concern about our porous southern border. We'll certainly talk about that. One of the other articles we've posted here is one that I'd like to get into maybe in the second hour when we have time, and that is, does moderate Islamic theology exist? And this was a piece that some others have been quoting from, and so I went back to the original source and wanted to address that as well. Then, of course, we also have something that we'd like to look at in terms of the Senate elections. And I know, Deb, you've been doing some research there, what that's going to mean in the future. And, of course, yesterday or 2 days ago was Constitution Day, and so we can learn some lessons there. So lots to cover today. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you would like to find some of the articles that we have posted today, we certainly have only worked our way through one of those, and that is the ISIS strategy is Mission Impossible. We'll get into a couple of the others in just a minute, and we have posted some videos for you to watch. And of course, we encourage you, as we've mentioned before, to take advantage of some of the resources we are making available to you. We have, of course, the podcast, so if you would like to listen to this later or send it to someone that you think might want to listen to this, as we've said, about 30,000 podcasts downloaded every single month. We have, of course, in addition to that, the Livecast, where you can watch what is happening in studio. We just this week released our first video, which is based upon the content. We're taking some of the things that are discussed here on the program. This was an interview we did with Lou Dobbs, and we put video to it. It's now on our YouTube channel. It's also on our Facebook page, and we encourage you to watch it and then send it on to some millennials, because sometimes they're more likely to watch a video than actually read an article. And even if they do read the article, they'll certainly benefit from some of the images that we have there to illustrate the point. And every week we will have a new video coming out. We already have quite a few in the pipeline right now that we'll be releasing every week. And so those are all great resources that are available. And we're going to give it another week, but then we're going to put on our POV section, our Pray, Organize, and Vote. And that is to give you all the information you need so that you can make an intelligent decision about those individuals that you will be voting for in November. Let's take a break, though. We'll come back and take some more of your phone calls. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us. If you'd like to know more about her, she's listed in the web links, and we will give you that opportunity to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us. And let's take a few of those phone calls left over from the last hour. We are going to get into some of the questions this hour of, does moderate Islamic ideology exist? And this is a very good piece that we have posted on our website. It comes from Tawfiq Hamid, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Also, it relates to these elections that we're going to be talking about, the Constitution that we certainly want to focus some time and attention on this hour based upon the fact that we just had Constitution Day 2 days ago. But let's finish off with some of the phone calls from that first hour as we talked about ISIS and our southern borders. Anthony in Alabama listening to KJNP. And Anthony, thank you for joining us. I guess maybe that's Alaska. Excuse me. Anthony, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for having me on the air. I just want to make a brief comment on this, your program there. One thing that, President Obama is so liberal, but one thing the government needs to emphasize, Border Patrol on the northern border in Canada, which is so not monitored that closely like the southern border, which is correct. But they have to emphasize on the Russian mafia up there, and also the southern borders, the cartel. And also here in the U.S., the big drug dealers and stuff like that, these group of people will pay and do anything to just get their foot in the door.
Yes.
And so that was my comment. They just need to really tighten up and really keep an eye, a real close eye, because they're capable of anything.
You mentioned the northern border. We haven't talked as much about that because everybody focuses on the southern border. And, of course, Debbie just talked about Mr. O'Keefe that has been on the program before, James O'Keefe, dressing up as Osama bin Laden, walking across, and then hitchhiking and all the rest. But because I have lived in California and I've lived in Oregon and I've traveled all over the Pacific Northwest and I have actually taken courses in Canada, I am aware of the fact that there are one or two places in the border between the United States and Canada where there are no people monitoring. Now, some of that has changed, but there was a time, Debbie, where there was at least one road going from the United States into Canada where it just had cones out there and it just said check in. Which is probably no better than what we have on our southern border. So Anthony is right on target, and living in Alaska there gives him an opportunity to kind of think about that. But we need to pay more attention, and I'm concerned, can I even maybe use the word offended, that we have people in Homeland Security saying, it's not that big of a problem, when we can demonstrate that it is a big problem. And so let's just tell the American people the truth.
Absolutely. The American people, they are watching enough of the videos to realize that the southern border is completely porous, and it's not for lack of trying, it's lack of funding down there enough, and the willingness, just the will to enforce the border. I don't fault the border agents. They're doing everything they can do with the limited resources they have, but sure, it's the main job of a country. Or as one of the commentators made a comment, if you don't have a border, you're not a country. Yeah. You're just something less. On the Canadian side, I don't know if you would want to talk briefly about what they had to say in Canada, but they're talking about the idea that this Islamic State has made significant efforts to infiltrate in Canada, including an egregious attempt to recruit Canadian jihadists.
Yes.
And this idea of using footage, they had a video that came out of a man explaining why he left Canada to fight for the Islamic State. because in his early days watching hockey and fishing, and concludes that that's all they do in Canada, and jihad is much more fulfilling than Canadian life. But they actually have a video out there encouraging people to join jihad because Canada's activities are too boring. And they also have a mom whose son was recruited by jihadists, a Canadian woman who's formed a support group for other Canadian moms because her son got drawn in by radical jihadists and was killed in fighting over some of the Middle East.
So, Anthony, right on target. And matter of fact, the article that we could certainly make available to everybody talks about that video. Maybe we'll even see if we can post some of that a little bit later. Let me take at least one more phone call before we move into some of our other topics, and that is we'll go to South Carolina this time, WLPE. And Jack, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Yes, sir. I've heard a lot of reports in the news, and I'm sure everybody has, of hundreds of Americans, British, and Europeans who have, valid, active passports that are citizens of our country who just need to fly back. I mean, never mind the borders. And I was wondering, I know, after 9/11, there was a lot done about, watching out for people coming through airports and so forth. We all know the changes that have been taking place there, but just curious about these folks who actually could just fly back just like I could.
Sure. And David Cameron has talked about that, the Prime Minister of the UK. We have had some other reports. There is a piece, a bill before Congress, probably a better way to say that would deny individuals that have gone overseas and shown support for groups like ISIS or Hamas or Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban from being allowed to come back in this country. But, Debbie, that illustrates the point. The fact that we even have to propose a bill to do what would, I think, be common sense illustrates how far we are from protecting ourselves today.
Absolutely. I believe that bill was proposed in the Senate by Ted Cruz, by our Texas U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, and I believe he's not finding a lot of support. I don't think it's going to get out of the Senate.
And I think there's a reason for that, in case people are saying, well, why wouldn't we do the obvious thing, is that there is a disagreement about what some of these radical groups might be. I think we would probably get unanimity that ISIS is a terrorist group. I think we would get unanimity that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are terrorist groups. But even though Hamas is listed as a terrorist group, I'm not sure you could get a majority of the senators to say that support of Hamas would be justification enough to refuse an individual entry into this country. So that's what the sticking point seems to be, if I'm kind of reading between the lines.
That sounds exactly right. There's also a split view on Muslim Brotherhood. It's an astounding thing to say, but there are Americans who would say the Muslim Brotherhood is not a problem, is not necessarily a terrorist organization.
Well, they can't possibly be, because we have at least, 4 members of the Muslim Brotherhood that are in the Obama administration that are well documented, at least. There are probably others, but at least those that are well known.
Absolutely. So alarming.
Anybody that does not believe that, first of all, we have done an Outlook article on that. And if you want to challenge that at all, Frank Gaffney will be here on Monday, and he has done probably the best research on some of that, about how some of these individuals who have sympathies or family relations to groups like Muslim Brotherhood actually serve in the administration currently. So those are the challenges we have before us. Amazing. We're a little bit later going to talk about these elections, and you might not agree with everybody that is serving in office right now, and you may not be able to remove all of them from office. President is not up for re-election. 66, or I guess it's 64 members of the Senate aren't up for re-election right now. But we have 35, I understand, in the Senate and 435 in the House of Representatives, not to mention governors and state senators and state representatives. So pay attention to what they believe. And we're going to, as I've said before, have our POV, Pray, Organize, and Vote section on the website coming up so that you can find out a little bit more about how they have voted on various issues, what stands they have taken, and how they filled out some of these surveys from these various groups around the country. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we'll talk about, does moderate Islamic ideology exist? And we'll get into some other issues, including the upcoming campaign and whether or not the Republicans will take control of the United States Senate. Lots more to talk about right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Brady Boyd admits in a recent article, "I'm addicted to being busy," but he is quick to add that he isn't the only one with a problem. He's a pastor and sees lots of problems. He says, "We think if we can keep going, keep busy, keep plowing ahead, our conscience won't have time to catch us. We think it is easy to chase after the tempting buzz of busy living, so we have learned to actually recognize the signs of addiction of busyness. First, you feel like you're in your glory when you're busiest. Most of us like how success feels, so we don't want to unplug. We don't want to relax. If you are a busyness junkie, the last thing you want is any semblance of white space, because that will cause the undesirable effects of withdrawal. Second, you're more fascinated with gadgets than with God. Brady Boyd tells the story of getting to work and realizing he left his phone at home. He admits that he was more distraught than if he had misplaced one of his children. He says he did get a different kind of call that day. It was a call from God. "Come to me and I will give you rest." He didn't pick up. Third, your favorite compliment has become, "Wow, you're always so busy." Unfortunately, in our world today, being busy is a way to impress people. The calculation goes like this: if I'm busy, then I'm important. If I'm important, then you'll be impressed. He says impression management becomes a full-time job, and it's exhausting. Fourth, you don't have time for the ones you love. If we're observant, we can see the hurt in the eyes of our loved ones. They feel like you have time for everyone but them. They feel neglected. I applaud Brady Boyd for his honesty and vulnerability. We are busy people, and we need to reevaluate our priorities in our busy lives. Most of us are doing too much. We're hurting the people around us, and we're hurting ourselves. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Debbie Georgatos with us today, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to the piece that we've posted here, Does Moderate Islamic Ideology Exist? But let's take one more phone call first. We'll go to North Carolina, WLGP. Andrea, thank you for calling today.
Hi, thank you, Kerby. I referenced the Boston Marathon bombing 4/15/2013. I listen to your show regularly. I'm asking the question, where is Russia in this? Those were boys, brothers from Chechnya, and the Ukraine thing is a new thing, and I don't know if it's a dumb question, but I just want to know where is Russia in all this?
I'm glad you put it on. That's why I want to jump to your phone call here. Let's try to put some perspective here. First of all, the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, he's always had problems with the Muslim republics. Remember, the former Soviet Union had Azerbaijan and all the Stan countries and all the rest that are part of that. So you have Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and all the rest. These Muslim republics were always a real challenge to Russia. So in one sense, Russia, and at least Vladimir Putin, faces a threat from Islam. But it's not a great threat to him right now. And so in some respects, you have an interesting kind of situation. And Debbie, I want to get your comments, because it's kind of the example of the enemy of my enemy becomes my ally. That is, there is really no agreement between the philosophy of communism and Vladimir Putin and ISIS, but both of them are sort of opposed to the United States in some way or another. And because the United States gets tied up with ISIS, it allows Vladimir Putin to do a lot more in, for example, Ukraine, right?
Absolutely. The world's a complicated place. It just seems like all trying to figure out who's really our ally and on what issue. I did, while we were on the break, we were talking about this issue, I quick looked this up online. There was apparently a statement made in Paris by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He said in Paris, he's the Russian Foreign Minister, that Russia has a contribution to make in the joint efforts toward defeating ISIS. And so I don't know what exactly he is committing to have them do, but he's at least saying out loud,
Sure.
We understand we have to fight ISIS. Yeah, they have had problems there. And the other point is just about the distraction element. We're so focused on ISIS, and it may allow Putin to go be more aggressive in the Ukraine, other places. It may allow President Obama, for example, to push more on immigration, something where he do his immigration amnesty, something that he knows is very unpopular, but if we're all focused and worried about ISIS and the beheadings, maybe we won't react so much. So there's a lot of that distraction play.
Yeah, and again, this is kind of interesting because on the one hand, you can see that Russia has had very close alliances with Libya when Muammar Gaddafi was there, still had alliances with Iran when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was the leader there, had some alliances even with Egypt, but on the other hand, faces perhaps a very significant threat from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So it's complicated, but at the same time, I think it illustrates the point that you sort of have to look at the world as a chess player, not as a checkers player, because it's a lot more complicated than is easily put into a box. For those of you that are interested in prophecy, and we'll probably do another one of those programs sometime in the future, you've got to say that if indeed I take seriously what we see, for example, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, we see a coalition apparently from Gog and Magog and Meshech and Tubal, and as you follow those names of those countries, you're talking about Russia and Turkey. You're also talking about some of these other countries like Libya, and of course it talks about Persia. Well, that's the name that Iran had until the 1930s. So you can see that there could be sometime in the future some kind of coalition between Russia and Islamic countries, Muslim countries. And if you had said that, matter of fact, if I'd said this on the radio program back in the 1980s when Marlon Maddox was the host, a lot of people would just roll their eyes. Now, when I just mentioned all the alliances that Vladimir Putin has had with Muslim leaders, you can see how that theoretically could take place. So, Andrew, you ask a very good question, but let me get on to this issue of Islam for just a minute. And that is Tawfiq Hamid, who is really quite a scholar on Islam, said, the problem we have in trying to find moderate Muslims is where would a person who wanted to be a moderate Muslim go? And he uses one particular passage out of the Quran. And if you wanted to understand this idea of jihad, I'll give you an assignment. Pick out a Quran. You can go to a Barnes & Noble, but you can actually find it online, so you don't have to pay any money. Go to Surah 9. It's the 9th chapter of the Quran. And in Surah 9, you have Surah 9:5, which is the Surah, the passage of the sword. But here he uses a different one, which is very good, and it's Surah 9:29. It's the 9th chapter, 29th verse, and it simply says, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and do not consider unlawful what Allah and His messenger have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from those who are given the scriptures," Jews and Christians, "and fight until they gave the jizya willingly until they are humiliated," or some translations say until they are subdued. And this is where you get the idea first of Sharia law. You also get the idea of dhimmitude, that is that these are what are called dhimmis, or they have to pay a jizya or a poll tax, and that's exactly what ISIS is demanding right now. If I let you live, Jew or Christian, you are going to have to be subdued and you will have to pay this outrageous tax. So, again, Tawfiq Hamid says, okay, if we're trying to find an interpretation that would bring you to something other than Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or ISIS, where would you go? And he said, well, first of all, if you look at the Hadith, which is the commentaries on that, you see that Muhammad said, "I have been ordered to fight the people until they say," and then, of course, this is in Arabic, "None has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and whoever said, 'No God other than man,' Allah will save his property and his life from me." So you say, well, okay, maybe I'll go to some of the schools of Islamic jurisprudence. He gives you a very long list of all those, and all of them pretty much lead as well to some critical radical interpretations. And then he goes and says, well, maybe if you looked at other improved interpretations of the Quran, you would find it. I'm giving a brief summary, but Debbie, as you've read through this, the point he's making is if you want to come to a view of moderate Islam, these kinds of verses are obviously calling for a violent jihad. And when you then try to find a commentary that would support a moderate interpretation, it's pretty hard to find.
Absolutely is. To me, what I took from this article is, excuse me, that actually Islam itself, the teachings of the religion, it is radical, it is violent. And that's what he's basically saying is what they are taught from Allah on is this idea that Muslims must, as encountering other people, they must force them to join Islam, pay, and be humiliated or die. Those are three choices. And he's saying there's no place you can go in genuine Islamic teaching to find a different interpretation. And so I really just, it drove home the point I've heard others make, which is that Islam is not a religion of peace. In its own teachings, it is not. So someone in America, there certainly are, I'm sure, Muslims who are moderate, who don't want to engage in jihad. But to what the teaching of the religion itself is, from this gentleman who knows firsthand, is that's what the teaching is. And this article also kind of goes through the 5 sources or places you can go for to learn about Islam. And as Kerby just went through, and he's far more familiar than I with all this, at every level of teaching, whether it's the Quran or the things beyond that, they all say the same thing.
Yeah, and we've had moderate Muslims on this program, and certainly there is a need to hear more of them to speak out. But I get this question all the time, and after the break, probably we can take some more phone calls. But one of the questions is, why aren't we hearing from moderate Muslims? And even this last week, we had a chance to play this piece that came from Bill Maher when he was on the PBS program, in which he was saying, there isn't an equivalence. We don't have beheadings that are happening in the Vatican City. We don't have vast numbers of Christians that believe that if you draw a picture of Jesus, you should be killed. We don't have vast numbers of Christians that believe that if indeed you leave the Christian faith, you should be killed. And so it is harder to find the moderate Muslims. And the reason is, number one, there is a consequence to pay if you are a moderate Muslim and speak out against radical Islam. They may take you out. Number two is back to the point that Tawfiq Hamid is pointing out, and that is, if you are true to a literal interpretation of the Quran in Surah 9:5, in Surah 9:29, and many other passages, it does call for a radical jihad. And so you have to, if you're a moderate Muslim, contextualize that and say, well, that was true in Muhammad's day in the 7th and 8th century, but it's not true today in the 21st century. Or you just have to simply say, well, I'm a Muslim culturally, but I don't accept the teachings of the Quran. And you see how that puts you sort of at a disadvantage with other radical Muslims.
One point he makes near the end of this article, which is really very good, he says, of course, there are many moderate Muslims, but until the leading Islamic scholars provide peaceful theology that actually contradicts the violent views of the Islamic State and all this Islamic teachings, there's no basis for this. He says, the existence of moderate Islam must be questioned.
Well, again, I wanted to put that on our particular reading list. It's our third article today. Does moderate Islamic theology exist? Foster Friess kind of pointed to it, and I thought it was such a very well-written piece. And it does help you understand the sources of Islamic law, not just the Quran, but the Hadith, the disciples of Muhammad known as the Sahaba, as well as some of the schools of Islamic jurisprudence, as well as the tafsir, which is the interpretation of the Quran. And you can kind of see the situation moderate Muslims face right now. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, weekend edition. Debbie Georgatos in studio with us, and I might just mention in a minute we're going to get to our fourth article that we've posted today, important Senate races. And before we take another phone call, Debbie, let's talk about this, because when we talk about Islam, I think we made the case for any fair-minded individual that it is fairly radical. And yet you have individuals that are maybe already in office or running for office that are arguing that if we would just change our foreign policy, then these Muslims wouldn't be angry with us in the first place. You got one of these articles right in front of you, right?
I do. The article is entitled Rand Paul and the Foreign Policy Delusions of Libertarianism. But this author makes this great point about the libertarian delusion is that somehow most of the problems in the Middle East, the violence created by Islam, is a result of American actions, and if we would just step back or remain inert, as this article says, that will solve those problems. And that happened after 9/11. I recall right after 9/11, there were apologists right away saying, well, if we would just leave these people alone over there, they wouldn't do this. I think Americans have a hard time grasping that Islam itself is violent. We did not cause the violence. It's been there all along. But this is a great article, just all about the idea of what is the right philosophy as America when you are a country founded in Judeo-Christian values. We were and need to be the leader of the free world. How do we deal with such a radical, different ideology as Islam is presenting?
Well, and Rand Paul's a good example. I mean, he the other day was talking about Hillary Clinton as being a war monger of some sort. I mean, he didn't quite use those words, but that's kind of what he was getting at, the war candidate. And I think this is going to be part of this presidential election. How far do we go? Now, I'll be the first to admit, have there been some policies that America has implemented? Have we backed the wrong people sometime? No doubt. Okay, that's on the table. We already understand that. But if you think that if we no longer support Israel, if we withdraw our troops from these various countries of the world, that radical Islam will say, oh, okay, we can live in peace with these individuals.
Yeah.
You do not understand the nature of radical Islam. And so as much as we say we don't want to be the policeman of the world, the reality is the world would be in a much worse place if America as a superpower wasn't there as a deterrent. True?
Absolutely true. And I actually think it's a very interesting thing, which you just mentioned a moment ago, that Rand Paul, who considers himself a serious candidate for president, does see himself as more centrist on foreign policy than the likely Democrat candidate Hillary Clinton, who's seen a little bit more of the world. I'm not saying I support her, but at least on that notion, she is firmer about needing to defend America's interests. And actually, Rand Paul is getting a lot of heat about this. He's objecting to being called an isolationist. But whatever word you use, if you don't see the need for the goodness of America to be represented around the world in areas where there is just otherwise going to be violence and bloodshed and just breakdown of civilized society, then you don't really see the uniqueness of America as exceptionalism and greatness.
Well, again, there is a very long list that various guests on this program have put forward on what America would, or what the world would look like without America having some kind of muscular military presence. That doesn't mean that we need to have American troops in every country of the world. As a matter of fact, that is something that I agree with both Ron Paul and Rand Paul. Sometimes I say, why do we have troops in so many countries of the world where it doesn't make sense? And part of it goes back to alliances and even the way in which the military-industrial complex runs. I understand all that. So, I mean, I live in the real world, and I know that the world isn't always black and white. There's some shades of gray. But the reality is, as much as we would like to just disconnect from the world, and as much as there are people that are convinced that it's our policies that are making these radicals angry with us, they have a goal, and it is a goal to establish a worldwide caliphate in which they impose Sharia law, that if you are even allowed to live, you're going to pay a jizya, a poll tax, to even survive. This is their, if you will, eschatological goal, and that is something that should concern every American, and we just sometimes can't get our head around it because we can't imagine how evil this particular enemy is. But all you have to do is look at some of the videos on Facebook right now, and you get a pretty good idea of what you're dealing with.
You sure do. You know, on the subject of America not wanting to be the world's policeman, and actually that expression, I think, came out of some kind of left-wing thinking that just was very harsh about the idea of having troops. And we can't have troops everywhere. We can't run the world. But the presence, for example, of American troops in Iraq, right? You know, when President Obama and Vice President Biden, they were hailing just a couple of years ago a stable, prosperous Iraq. but they did not decide to leave troops there and allow that and hold on to that stability. They brought troops home, which is what caused the collapse over there.
Yeah, and we played some of the pieces and even one of the articles we had last week, George W. Bush, what he said back there in 2008, 2009, about what that might look like. So let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Texas first. Art, what would you like to share with us today?
Yes, sir. I was just looking into this, and I was kind of comparing it with the Christians as far as the Muslims, as far as the radicalized Muslims. I want to know if it was similar to Christians. Let's say, not really being radical, even though that's what the world labels a person, especially a Christian who starts to read his Bible, who starts to follow a Christian life a little more closely. Is that what a Muslim would consider a radical? You know, the world considers Christians radical when they begin to become a more...
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sure. You know, and I've said this before in my book, Art, and if I put you on hold, I'll be glad to send you a copy of my book. If you want to give your address to Catherine, we'll send one to you, because I make a very good case, and that is the more literal you interpret the Bible, especially the New Testament, the more likely you are to be what? Peace-loving, because it talks about turn the other cheek and to love your enemies and to not take vengeance. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. But you also recognize the role of government to execute unbelievers and to protect you. So the more literal you take, if you will, the more radical you become as a Christian, the more peace-loving you are. However, the more radical you are, the more literal you take the Quran. I just gave you a verse from Surah 9:29. I can give you Surah 9:5, where it says, slay the infidel, and many other passages, the more likely you are to be what? A jihadist. So there's a striking difference, because radical is sometimes used as a term of derision, but the more radical you are as a Christian, the more I would want to be around you. In other words, if I knew that there was a radical Christian and a radical Muslim walking down a dark alley, who would I certainly look forward to being around, and who would I want to be away from? And I think we know what the answer to that is, don't we?
Absolutely. And we were speaking in the break a moment ago just about the idea, of looking at the founders of these faiths. I mean, if you want to be a radical Muslim and more closely align your behavior and your life with Muhammad's, or you're a Christian, you want to more closely align your behavior and your beliefs with the life of Christ Jesus. I mean, there is no comparison between the lives, the teachings, the goodness. They're polar opposites.
Yeah, who would you like to invite to your dinner table? Who would you like to babysit your kids? Jesus or Muhammad? I'll let you figure that one out. Let's go to Alaska. Lloyd, thank you for calling today. What would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you for shifting my call. I'm not political or anything, but what I've seen and hear on the news, the Congress, they argue and blame each other. And then the Islamic extremists back in 9/11, they even have a far-reaching way up here in the North Slope of Alaska. And the security went real tight at the Prudhoe Bay oil fields. And what I want to quote was from the famous President Abraham Lincoln. The people of the United States are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution.
Great quote. Thank you.
I remember 9/11, they got together, the whole country got together, and they went after the terrorists. And now I believe they're getting complacent. And another thing is, America can't be all over the whole world at once, but I believe in my heart they have to be behind Israel.
I agree with that, too. Boy, I appreciate you calling in. We're taking a break here, so I'll come back and see if we can get another phone call. But, Debbie, when we come back, I want to talk about two issues that he put on the paper. First of all, the Constitution. We should certainly recognize we're the rightful masters of Congress and the courts, because we're given the power from the Constitution, and we should throw out the people that don't believe in the Constitution. I can think of some law professors, too, but that's another story. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I want to get to the last article here, important Senate races, because there are a couple of really key ones, and we've posted that article as well. We're getting into the election period, and we want to talk about a couple of these key races, and many of you live in some of the states where who you elect to the Senate will determine what happens in terms of judicial appointments, what happens in terms of treaties, what happens in terms of legislation. So certainly all elections are important, but these 35 Senate races, very key. So we'll come back and certainly appreciate Lloyd because he set the table for some of the conversation we'll have right after these important messages.
There's much talk today, even in Christian circles, about getting our needs met. A counselor I know asked this question: are we a bucket of needs waiting to be filled in order to give to others what God commands we give? Many people would never get around to following God's plan if they were waiting to first get their own felt needs met. In fact, many of what we call needs, much of what we think we really deserve and have got to have, well, these are not really needs. We desire things like love and significance, which, although blessings, are not needs. Often we'll find these blessings in relationships, like marriages or friendships. Trouble is, Christians who don't get all these blessings are told they are needs and to look to Jesus as the need meter. This rings true, but is it? My psychologist friend Steve Clay wants believers to look at this differently, and first to consider what our real needs are. Certainly we need food and water to live on this earth. We need God's forgiveness through Christ to live eternally. But what about our psychological and emotional desires? Are they needs? We were created to need other people, but not, and stick with me here, not necessarily to be loved by them. Steve writes, we need other people in order to accomplish God's purposes and most accurately reflect His ultimate glory. This means that we need to love rather than we must be filled by another's love. And conversely, he writes, to love another is not because they need love, but rather there is a need in us to reflect the character of God in showing love. Marriage is a teacher here. A lot of us enter marriage expecting it to meet our needs, and we learn pretty quickly about the ebb and flow that sometimes means you have to give more than you get. Some people lament that they're mostly on the net giving side. Psychologist Ed Welch says this imbalance is actually scriptural. Philippians 2:3 instructs believers to, with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. This doesn't mean, writes Dr. Welch, that we don't care about being loved. It simply means that we always want to outdo others in love. He then asks, do we run the risk of a lopsided relationship? Absolutely. This is the relationship we have with God. He always loves first and most. This way of looking at needs helps with another problem many Christians readily admit to having. We'll confess to being people pleasers, seeing this as perhaps a lesser sin, but it's really idolatry. Dr. Welch asks believers, where is our treasure? Our treasure is in the admiration of others. Pleasers seek the approval of other people more than God, and that is in the wrong order. Believing saint, you need to seek Him. Then you'll reflect His glory. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, we might be able to slip in another phone call, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us. Let me just mention her book, Ladies, Can We Talk? We also have the web link, and for those of individuals that like to hear you on Sunday morning, you have Rafael Cruz coming in?
I do.
Oh, boy, that'll be good.
Yeah, Sunday morning we're going to talk about actually Pulpit Freedom Sunday coming up, where pastors should be able to speak about things that are
we'll do that.
May cross the line. So, yes.
Well, we've had him in the studio. We need to have him in again. You know, if you think Ted Cruz is bold, you haven't met his father yet. It's quite a family. Okay, the Constitution. This Wednesday was Constitution Day. 227 years ago, we had the ratification and the signing of the United States Constitution. You've been at least a student in law school, and you certainly have been involved in the legal profession. We know that some lawyers and some politicians say, let's just ignore the Constitution. But the quote that Lloyd gave us just a minute ago, Abraham Lincoln says, well, no, we should actually be the masters of both Congress and the courts. And it seems to me that the Constitution has stood the test of time, and we need to elect individuals to office that believe the Constitution, as written in the 18th century and as amended since then, still should be the guideline for what we do in political office.
Absolutely. There's a famous quote actually by President Obama years ago before he was president. He spoke about the Constitution as a charter of negative liberties. Again, I said it too fast. Charter of negative liberties. He was making the point that the Constitution restricts the federal government. It doesn't let the government do as many things like forced integration and forced socialism, forced redistribution of wealth. And this was a complaint, in which I think should all help us realize and appreciate the beauty of the Constitution, because it was intended to limit the federal government. It was intended to maximize personal liberty for individuals and to give a structure. It's kind of like a skyscraper, and these are the girders, the foundation. The girders is what holds the country in place. It really matters. And if you didn't have it, you would have, people in America benefit from it and don't realize it. If you thought, well, what if we had a law that said, you cannot discuss politics on Wednesdays or something like that, or you can't go to this particular church anymore. We wouldn't even think that would happen. And it's because of the Constitution. It doesn't even enter our thought that such an absurd thing could happen. But it's because the Constitution has been there protecting us all these years.
Well, and I remember when I was walking through Philadelphia a number of years ago. I've taken the tour a couple of times, but this last time I was there when indeed we were going to where Benjamin Franklin walked. And Benjamin Franklin was approached in 1787 by a woman in Philadelphia as the Constitutional Convention ended. And the woman came up to Benjamin Franklin and asked, have you given us a monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And we can see the twinkle in his eyes, because indeed what we have is an individual that recognized that we could lose our republic. We could lose the opportunity to enjoy the freedom that we have. And I do believe that some of the challenges we talked about in the first hour, some of these religious liberty challenges, are those incremental changes that eventually could cause us to look around someday and say, we don't have a republic anymore.
Absolutely. And I mentioned, Kerby, a moment ago about my law school at Georgetown has one of the leader professors who is advocating among law schools to say we need to get rid of the Constitution. We don't need it. It's archaic. It doesn't matter. And another of the Georgetown professors spoke recently and was making the point that people say that not because the Constitution is problematic or hard to follow. It's because it restricts people who want to control society, who want bigger government, bigger control. And it's really important to hear that and to reject it as just would fundamentally transforming America. If we lose the Constitution, major transformation of our country.
Let's take another phone call real quickly, and then we'll get into some of these Senate races. In Georgia, Mary, what would you like to share with us today?
Hi, I just thank you so much for using the term jihad. Everyone is dancing around it, but that's what it is. It is a jihad.
That's what they call it. Yeah, let's use the same terms they use. Yes. Exactly.
Romans 13, and I just came across this recently, but and through another group, but it talks about the rulers, and we believe in turn the other cheek and love your neighbor, but when you're faced with evil, the ruler is the minister of God to thee for good, for he beareth not the sword in vain. And this is it.
Verse 4.
He is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So he's an agent of wrath when as a ruler, there is evil being done.
Yeah, and again, as I've been giving some assignments out here, especially if you said, I don't want to read the Quran, fine. Well, then I want you to read Romans 13, 1-7, verses 1-7, Romans 13, and she was quoting from verse 4. I know that because we talked about it yesterday in terms of the sword. It says, government does not bear the sword for nothing or for anything, depending which translation you have. And the idea of the sword is to execute those criminals inside that particular nation, and also to protect you from foreign invaders. Government is to do that. And Paul says there that if you want to have no fear of those in authority, do what is good. But if you are an evildoer, whether you're talking about a criminal or a terrorist, you better fear government, because it does not bear the sword for nothing. It bears the sword to protect us, and that is the responsibility of the government.
Do you think that passage is a justification for Christians to, or it could be based to make the argument you need to participate in elections because you're creating that government that has that tremendous responsibility?
Yes, well, I think both in Romans 13 and in 1 Peter, when it talks, it seems to imply that God holds those in authority responsible. And back to this, we're a republic, so who's ultimately responsible? It is the voters. We are exercising a level of political authority Christians in the past could not ever have imagined. We're going to elect 435 members of the House of Representatives, 35 U.S. senators. You add up all the other governor's races, state senator races, almost 30,000 from state senators and U.S. senators all the way down to dog catcher, 30,000. And we are exercising a lot of political power. And for just a minute, we've posted this very good article about the important Senate races. But what have you found, Debbie? I know we only have a few minutes, but there are some really key races that some of our listeners need to pay attention to, right?
There are key races. In fact, a moment ago, our caller, I believe, was from Georgia. And it does look like in Georgia, it's going to go Republican this time, and that Dave Perdue will win that. But, participating in all these close races is so important to recognizing at the end the media and the left tries to spin things. But as one example, in Kentucky, there was a major battle over the primary in Kentucky. And actually, Mitch McConnell won, who's the incumbent minority leader in the Senate, and he appears to be back on track. He was down in the polls. A big race that a lot of people paid attention to was in Kansas because the incumbent Republican senator there, Senator Pat Roberts, very major primary challenge.
Win that one.
That's very up in the air. In fact, I think some people were so upset about how the establishment Republicans came on to support the incumbent rather than let the people sort out the primary, are upset. But anyway, so we need every Republican we can get in the Senate because of the importance of the judicial seats that will be up. They're just, the Senate decides, and we need to make sure we have Republicans who will choose we have to have conservatives choosing conservative answers. So Pat Roberts, I guess, is up in Kansas. That's been very, very dicey, but I guess we're going to win it. And then we have a big race that everyone should know about is in New Hampshire. There's an incumbent New Hampshire Democrat, Jean Shaheen. She doesn't even want to talk about Obamacare. You can't even get her to say the word out loud in the campaign trail, but she's the incumbent Democrat being challenged by this gentleman, Scott Brown, who was
ran in Massachusetts.
Yes, he was a Republican senator from Massachusetts, and he's running now in New Hampshire, and that race is very, very close. He's a very likable guy, but this is a Democrat state, so it would be a very big thing if he could win that one. And that one other caution in this article, I could not agree more, has to do with libertarian voting. If you love the libertarian ideas, that's your business. But at the end of the day, libertarians cannot win national elections. And if you vote libertarian in a race when you have a choice between a Republican and a Democrat, and you would have, assuming, go with the Republican, you're helping the Democrat. And that's just something to keep in mind.
Certainly. Well, we're just about out of time. And again, I mentioned your talk show. It is Sunday morning, and people can listen to it in the Dallas area at 6:60 a.m., right? 7 a.m. And if they don't have a chance to listen, then go to your website. And we have a link to your website and hear a little bit more. And you're going to have Rafael Cruz on. So it's been great to have you on the program today.
Thank you so much.
I know we'll have you here next week as well. So we certainly look forward to that next opportunity. We certainly encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. One more thank you to those of you that helped us meet our $50,000 match. And if you want to still support us, we would certainly appreciate that as well. Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for the help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here on Monday.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.